Awesome. Awesome. All right. It's fabulous to see all of you. And let's keep pushing deeper. In fact, we're going to get into some really fascinating, wonderful things in Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy. And we left off on Tuesday talking about a critical moment in the book and in our understanding of what Nietzsche means by the Apollonian, the Dionysian, the agon, the conflict and the agon between them, and how that agon produces what Nietzsche considers heroic individuals, emotionally powerful, poetically creative, intellectually creative people, and how those people produce these profound works of art called the Antigone. That's where we are. And in book 2 and 3 and 4, Nietzsche, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's a critical moment, and then we're going to get into the core stuff. What's really important about Tuesday is that Nietzsche he's telling it, and you get your head around this and you're going to own it. Nietzsche's telling us the history of Western civilization, right? And he begins that in what he calls the Homeric / Apollonian moment, what we were calling the Homeric moment, right? 750, 650 BC, Iliad, Odyssey, whatever. And then he's going to tell us the story about how that Homeric moment becomes tragedy, Greek tragedy. How does that happen? What happens? And what makes that moment for Nietzsche superior? Why does Nietzsche valorize that moment, right? And that's where we are. And by the way, this is the key to it all. And the important thing to know about chapter 2, and then as chapter 2 sets up 3 and 4, and that's where we're going today, is that Nietzsche wants to argue, he does argue, that original Homeric / Apollonian moment, as powerful and inventive and necessary as it is, it was the first moment of Greek self-creation. This is when the Greek world begins. This is when Greeks start to think of themselves as Greeks. This is the origin of Western civilization, right? So this is extraordinary. And in the bigger scheme of the things we're talking about, this is what we're talking about when we say meaning is a human invention. It's an assertion of power, right? These things link Nietzsche's story to the big ideas we're talking about together. Now, as essential as that Homeric moment is, what I call the Homeric / Holy Apollonian in the lecture notes and the outline I gave you, is that it originally conceived of the Dionysian as something grotesque and barbaric. And it did so because in this way, it always understood the Dionysian's ability to threaten and undermine order. That's what the Dionysian does on both a higher level as chaos, as nothingness, as natural powers that we can't master, and also on the individual level as this kind of seduction we have for intoxication and the undermining of our Apollonian rigidity and our personalities. So that first moment was the Apollonian tried to keep it out. The Homeric Apollonian tried to keep it out. Right? Now, Nietzsche says that this is not possible. And this is the key to the movement to Greek tragedy. It is impossible to keep out or resist or ultimately manage and control the Dionysian. This is the key, right? And so the Dionysian can't forever be repressed or overcome, either at the higher level in terms of nothingness, or chaos, or these natural events that shatter our broader, higher level Apollonian form, or even in crisis that happens to us personally, right? It is impossible. Here's the key. Here's what Greek tragedy knows. Okay, here's what it knows. And this is what it's going to incorporate into its art, into its culture, and into its individual view of the self. Okay? It is impossible for human beings or human things to achieve mastery over a world that in and of itself does not possess meaning or order, and one that is in constant change, and ultimately, as far as individuals are concerned, one that dies. no amount of Apollonian form/power, understood as language, technology, science, culture, health, engineering, all the different ways, self-discipline on the individual level, will ever be enough to master the cosmos. It will never be enough to master the Dionysian. And it will never be enough to master one's own death, right? And this is why Nietzsche says, and he argues, don't ever forget the origins of existence. The origins are nothing, right? Whatever meaning, value, and purpose is, it's a human invention. It's an assertion of power, and it emerges out of nothingness. The Greek world was invented. Before it, things existed, but they weren't the Greek world. They didn't have Greek meaning. They didn't have Greek value. They didn't have Greek purpose, right? There were things that existed, but they weren't Western civilization, right? And so this is why Nietzsche argues, don't ever forget the origins of meaning. The origins of meaning are nothing. The origins of meaning are a human invention. They're an assertion of power. And that process is contingent, it's unstable, and it's constantly in motion. And it's fragile. And so Nietzsche is saying, bear witness to the Dionysian, right? Bear witness to it. Recognize that the Dionysian can't ever be mastered, and that not only can it not be mastered, but the key to the tragic moment, the heroic perspective, is that the Greeks of the tragic age find a way of bringing what the Dionysian represents as a kind of terror of the nothingness, a terror of the abyss, existential terror. Life is overwhelming. It's terrifying at times. And a bearing witness, bringing into the way in which even you and I individually are seduced by intoxication, right? To sort of deconstruct our own rigidity, our own norms. For example, in Dionysian festivals like Carnival or Mardi Gras, okay? And so this is why it's so important that the tragic Greeks spiritualize, right? The chaos, the Dionysian, right? They you know, in the attempt at self-criticism way back, right, that we read, Nietzsche says the Greeks, the realistic art form, they're the ones who needed tragedy, right? What did they hunger for? That kind of a sharp-eyed craving, an awareness for what is difficult, an awareness for what is challenging, an awareness for what is terrifying, right? They understood the world. It has no inherent meaning or purpose. It's nothing. It's chaotic. It dismantles your meaning, your form, your value, your purposes. And by the way, that's what life is. It's that constant movement, both on a cultural level, we're dealing with it right now with COVID, and on the individual level, when our own personal dreams and values and hopes come apart, right? In the many ways it does, and ultimately even in death. And so this is the key. This is the key to that movement, right? What is it that makes the tragic Greeks heroic for Nietzsche? What did they know that makes them emotionally strong, poetically creative, and therefore live a certain way and produce a certain kind of art? And this is what they know, right? This is what they know. They understand that no matter how essential, how important, how necessary, how powerful and beautiful and erotic all the Apollonian things are, and they are, right? We are giving meaning and value and purpose to sunsets. We are building empires. We are creating art. We are making love, and we're forming friendships, and we're building temples. We're doing fucking amazing things. Right? And those things are human inventions. They come out of our mind, out of the dreams, right? It was in our dreams that these images of the fucking amazing things we're going to do come to our minds. They're acts of human volition and human imagination and human creativity. And they're necessary, otherwise the world doesn't have any meaning. Things don't have value. Things don't have purpose. So of course they're necessary. And they're powerful and profound and beautiful. But don't ever forget, this is the whole point of kind of the book, and this is the whole point of the tragic perspective. Don't ever forget that all of those things aren't human inventions. They're artificial. They're assertions of power, and they're fragile, right? And they're constantly being harassed and threatened and undermined and deconstructed for as long as you live. This only ends in death, by these Dionysian forces, these cosmic forces of nothingness and terror, right? Life is fucking hard. It's terrifying. There are plagues, there are pandemics, there are wars, there are genocides, there are even people trying to oppress and marginalize you, right? These orders are fragile and that they can come apart. And Nietzsche is saying, not only is it necessary to bear witness to that, but to find a way to incorporate that into your culture, into your meaning and value and purpose, into how you live and view your own life. And so he says, what do? Right? And he uses this example of the vaccine. What do? They give themselves part of the Dionysian, literally, that he uses the metaphor of a vaccine. Okay, and so what does that mean, right? And the metaphor is kind of the same as a vaccine. We take a little bit of the virus, whatever it is, right? And we do something with it with our Apollonian technology and our Apollonian knowledge and our Apollonian genetic engineering. We do something with it, we manipulate it, right? And this kind of heroic Apollonian moment, and we put it inside our body, right? So the body can fight it, can resist it, and can become stronger because of it, right? And Nietzsche's using this metaphor of vaccine. He says, the tragic Greeks do that with the Dionysian. They bring the Dionysian into their life. And by the way, they bring it into their life individually at the individual level by celebrating the Dionysian festivals, the music, the intoxication, right? You think about Carnival. What is Carnival? Carnival and Mardi Gras, they're kind of a controlled way of dissolving the order. Right? You think about what Burning Man is. Burning Man, everybody goes out into the desert and they get rid of the order. They leave the order in Silicon Valley. They leave the order in New York at the brokerage houses and the law firms, right? And in Silicon Valley, they go out in the desert, and what do? They're disordered. They're on drugs, taking ecstasy. They're taking mushrooms. There's no sexual rules. Right? And in a way, there's this kind of freedom that Nietzsche would say. And so Nietzsche is arguing these Greeks of the tragic age, they incorporate the Dionysian into the culture specifically through these Dionysian festivals, right? And here's the second part, and we're going to get to this right now. They incorporate this awareness of the Dionysian as nothingness, as the abyss, as death. They incorporate that awareness into their art. They incorporate it into their art. So I asked you to read the Antigone, right? And if you think about what the Antigone is, from a Nietzschean point of view, from a point of view that valorizes the tragedy, Greek tragedy, you've got this epic battle between Antigone and Creon. It's an epic existential life and death battle over meaning, right? They have fundamentally different meanings. Their lives have fundamentally different values. Their lives have fundamentally different purposes, right? And by the way, given their story they're telling about themselves, they're both right. Both Antigone and Creon are right. There's no moral lesson to the Antigone in this metaphysical or Christian or Platonic sense. At the end of the day, given the Homeric traditions, you can't look at Antigone and say, oh yeah, she's right. Or look at Creon and say, oh no, he's right. This doesn't exist because there is no rightness. There's no objective resolution to this existential battle of meaning and value between Antigone and Creon. It's two human beings who are giving their life meaning and value, and those meanings and values are at odds. They're at cross purposes, right? And it ends in death. Of course it does. Okay, right? And the Antigone, as a work of art, tells this story about existence, but it does so in this profoundly beautiful way. So tragedy tells you the truth, not objective truth, but the truth. Tragedy tells you the truth of life, that in and of itself, the world has no inherent meaning or purpose. There's no moral resolution, there's no moral correctness, there's no objective correctness to the battle between Antigone and Creon. Doesn't exist. Okay. Life ultimately has no inherent meaning or purpose, no objective correctness. The only meaning and value and purpose it has is what we give it, what Antigone gives it, what Creon gives it. And in this case, these things collide, and they collide quite profoundly, cataclysmically. Okay. And that is life, and you keep that going as long as you can. And so Nietzsche argues that the Greeks become, the tragic Greeks, they become heroic. They become a certain kind of people who produce a certain kind of art because they valorize the Dionysian in terms of the festivals. They understand that the rigidity, the Apollonian rigidity from time to time needs to be deconstructed. And they bring the awareness of nothingness at the higher level of the Dionysian into the culture through art. If you look at the Antigone, you're kind of, you go and you watch it as a play, you're kind of stunned. Wow, fuck, that's heavy. Right, there is no answer. There's just conflict. There's agon over meaning. There's agon over value. There's agon over purpose. Okay. You can either live as a slave, you can live as Ismene, or you can die as Antigone. Period. Now, that's a dramatic, of course, right? That's dramatic. But this is happening to you every day. You're on the streets protesting right now. Racial inequality. Oppression. Last year you were walking out of class over the ethnic studies, the desire to eliminate it, the gender studies, cultural studies. You're doing this. Is okay. The Antigone is a little dramatic. Of course, it's fiction. But it's happening every day in little ways, and sometimes big ways. Next week there's going to be an election. Civil war is kind of already going. The war between Antigone and Creon is already happening in America. People are shooting fucking other protesters. There are militia members occupying the Michigan fucking State House. 200,000 people dead of COVID. Okay, it's fucking happening. This isn't something abstract that you can't get your head around. This is you right now. So the Greeks become the Greeks. The tragic Greeks become the tragic Greeks because they know that the Apollonian order is a human invention. It's an assertion of power. But that it's fragile. And it's always being contested. It's either being threatened by Dionysian powers or contested by other people in the conflict over what things are going to mean. And rather than letting that awareness depress them or cripple them or make them sort of weak or afraid or nihilistic, they embrace it. They crave it. That's what Nietzsche was talking about at the attempt at self-criticism. They crave it. All right. All right, I know we've built this culture, or I know I've built this life. Okay. It's going to be contested. My own death is going to contest it. It's going to be contested by other people. I mean, for God's sake, if I didn't have 10, you know how, it's a fucking miracle I still have a job at CSUN. If I didn't have tenure, I'd have been fired 10 years ago for the stupid shit I say to you. There's a file this thick up in the dean's office. I've been on academic probation 18 out of the 20 years I've been at CSUN. Because of the battle I've had with the dean and the former president and the former dean. There are people up in the president's office, bottles of champagne underneath their fucking desk for the day I'm either retire or get fired. All right. Welcome to life.
But we all love you.
Yeah, your love will not help me cheat my death. All right. So can we transition now? Now let's get to the really fun stuff. Are we ready? Now, what Nietzsche does in 3 and 4 is elaborate on the theme of the way in which the Greeks of the tragic age bring the Dionysian in. Okay? In chapters 3 and 4, Nietzsche elaborates on the theme. He gives examples, poetic metaphors, examples of what this looks like using Greek literature, using Greek mythology. It's brilliant. But he elaborates by using metaphors and poetic examples from Greek mythology about how the Greeks became the Greeks of the tragic age and why this made them heroic. Okay? So the first thing he does in chapter 3, is he tells the story of King Midas, right? And it's on page 22. And it's right in the middle, right? And first he's going to talk about how the Greeks of the tragic age incorporate this awareness of the Dionysian as chaos, as nothingness, and therefore forces that threaten human meaning. Okay? So the story he's going to tell right now, he's talking about how the Greeks use this story to think and to think about and bear witness to the Dionysian as a kind of cosmic force, a nothingness or the abyss. And he says right in the middle, page 22, according to the old story, right? I love it, right? He says, according to the old story, King Midas had long hunted wise Silenus, Dionysus' companion. So apparently Silenus is another kind of demigod, right? Another kind of fictional god like Dionysus or Apollo. According to the old story, King Midas had long hunted wise Silenus, Dionysus' companion, without catching him. Right? When Silenus had finally fallen into his clutches, the king asked him, so finally King Midas captures Silenus. And by the way, Silenus was a kind of, had a reputation or was associated with a kind of knowledge of life, right? Like what's the purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? That was kind of Silenus's kind of thing, right? That's what he was known for. So King Midas, as the story goes, King Midas is hunting Silenus, the god Silenus, right? The demigod Silenus, who is the god of not what is life? What's the meaning of life? So King Midas is hunting him to capture him and ask him to demand that that Silenus, the god of kind of the meaning of life or what is life about, tell the king, right? What is the meaning of life? That's kind of the metaphor, right? And so according to the old story, King Midas had long hunted wise Silenus, Dionysus' companion, without catching him. And by the way, that's a metaphor for how we go through life trying to find meaning or figure out what the hell we're doing. You and I, we're King Midas, and we're hunting wise Silenus to figure out what the fuck we're doing. What's the meaning of life? What's the purpose? It's a metaphor. You and I are King Midas here. We're hunting Silenus. You and I are always asking every day, what am I doing? What's the meaning of my life? What's the purpose of my life? We're hunting wise Silenus. According to the old story, King Midas had long hunted wise Silenus, Dionysus' companion, without catching him. When Silenus had finally fallen into his clutches, so the king finally catches him, all right? When Silenus had finally fallen into his clutches, the king asked him, What was the best and most desirable thing of all for human beings, right? That's the point. And in a weird way, that's what we're doing, right? We are on a hunt to figure out what is best for human beings, what is the most desirable thing for our lives. Some of us are doing it in the search for God. Some of us are doing it in the search for philosophy. Some of us are doing it in the search for health and the enlightenment normalities, right? And the point is, we're always already doing it. The question is that quest for the meaning of life something we are inventing and giving, or are we demanding it come from other places? When Silenus had finally fallen into his clutches, the king asked him what was the best and most desirable thing of all for human beings. And the daimon, the god, the daimon, right? Socrates said he had a daimon in his head that told him. He had a little voice, a daimon. Socrates said it was in his fucking head, told him what not to do. The daimon stood silent. Silenus refused to, he stood silent, he refused to answer, stiff and motionless, until at last, forced by the king had to torture it out of him. Life, getting meaning out of life is hard. The Silenus stood silent, stiff and motionless, until at last, forced by the king, Silenus gave a shrill laugh. Right? Silenus gave a shrill laugh and spoke these words. Miserable, ephemeral race, children of hazard and hardship. This is Silenus speaking to King Midas, speaking about human beings. Silenus says, miserable, ephemeral, children of hazard and hardship. Why do you force me to say what it would be much more fruitful for you not to hear? This is brilliant. The best of all things is something entirely outside of your grasp. Not to be born. Not to be. To be nothing. But the second best thing for you is to die soon. Everything you need to know, right there. King Midas hunts his whole life for the god Silenus, who knows what is best for human beings. Finally, he captures him, and he asks the question that is dangerous to ask. This is dangerous stuff, raising the question of what the hell am I doing? What is best for us? What is best for human beings? The dangerous questions. And Silenus says to Midas, Silenus says to us, miserable. First of all, miserable. Most human beings are miserable. They're unhappy. They're depressed. They're terrified. Miserable, he says. Ephemeral, fleeting little things. Your mortality, your death makes you ephemeral. You've got maybe good 20 or 30 years. If you're lucky, you've lived to 60 or 70, only 30 of it is decent. Miserable, ephemeral race. Children of hazard and hardship. You are pushed around by natural forces you can't control. Miserable, ephemeral race. Children of hazard and hardship. Life is hard. Life is difficult. There's a lot of suffering. Why do you force me, Silenus, to say to you what it would be much more fruitful for you not to hear? Why do you want to know? You don't force me to tell you something you're not prepared to hear. And why aren't you prepared? Because it's too difficult for you to bear. The truth is too difficult for you to bear. That there is no inherent meaning or purpose to life. That life is extraordinarily difficult. It's a life of hazard and hardship, and then you die. And for most people, Silenus is saying that's too much. It is too much. I can't bear it. It's too much. Solenis says, why do you force me to tell you something you can't bear to hear? It's too much for you. You're not prepared for existence. You're not up for existence. You don't have the emotional strength for existence. You don't have the creativity for existence. You are miserable little creatures. You do not possess the strength to know the truth about your own existence. And so he says, and this is existentially brilliant. He says, the best thing for you, you want to know what's best for you? Solenis says to Midas, the best thing for you is something completely outside of your grasp. The best thing for you was never to have been born. The best of all things is something entirely outside of your grasp. Not to be born, not to be. Now, this is functioning on two levels. One, the best thing for human beings, Solenis is saying to us, is never to have been born. Why? Because most of us aren't up for the responsibility of our own existence. We're too weak. Depressing. It's sad. It's not happy. It's hard. And by the way, he's right. He's right. We say this to ourselves all the time. We say this to ourselves. We don't need Solenis to say this to us all the time. We say it to ourselves in moments of deep suffering. We say, why me? When tragedy comes or suffering comes or the Dionysian comes, we say, why me? Why me? It's unjust. Why me? Why my suffering? Why my sadness? Why this oppression? Why me? Why me in the cancer? We say, why me? And we're saying, and that's a version of, I wish I wasn't born. And in fact, we often say, not just why me? Why me? It's so unjust. It's so unfair. Why me? If you ask yourself that question, you don't understand existence. That's what Solenis is saying. If you ever said to yourself in a moment you've had a heart broken or someone you love has left you, or some tragedy has happened, which is fucking gonna happen to everybody. No one escapes it. No one's immune, right? No Apollonian power is gonna protect you from it. And you say, oh, I wish I was never born. Why me? I hate life. I wish I were never born. How many times have you heard that? How many times have you said it? That's what he's saying. The best thing for you is, and by the way, first of all, never to have been born. Because for most of you, most of us, it's too much. We're not up for it. By the way, that's why we have God. We're not up for it. And we prove Solenis right all the time. We say, why me? Anybody who says, why me, proves instantaneously that he or she is not up for the existential responsibility of fucking being alive. Because you think that somehow you should be protected from suffering, that you should be protected from tragedy, that you should be protected from disease or heartbreak or death. That somehow fucking there's justice. Every time you say, why me? You complain to the world or that there's no justice. And every time you do that, every time you ask a cosmos that in and of itself has no inherent meaning or purpose, why me? You prove Solenis right. We prove Solenis right. It's unfair. It's unjust. And the second part of this is even more powerful because it deconstructs metaphysics. It deconstructs metaphysics. The best thing for you is something that is totally outside of your grasp. Oh, what's that? To have never been born. Regarding the most important existential question, whether we exist or not exist, that existential question is something we have no influence over, right? We're born. We're like the man in the boat. By the time Nick Dungy becomes aware that Nick Dungy's Nick Dungy, with this meaning and this value and these purposes and these associations that have been imposed on me by power, by a kind of language that's been verbed on me. By the time I'm already aware of it, where am I? I'm in the boat. I'm fucking already in the boat. I'm at sea. I don't know where the hell I came from. I had no choice to be in the boat. Nobody had a choice to find themselves one day inside their own consciousness, being reflectively aware of the fact that they exist. You had no choice over it. You were thrown into your existence. You were thrown. You're already here. By the time you realize you're here, it's too late. You're already here. That's what was so beautiful about the way Nietzsche edits and cuts and pastes Schopenhauer, that passage from Schopenhauer. Think about subjectivity, think about consciousness, think about the awareness of who you are, that you are someone with a meaning, a value, and a purpose. As a boat, you're in a boat. When he used that passage, you don't know where the man came from. We meet the man in the boat. He's already in the boat. And the boat's out at sea, and there's a fucking storm. That is life. We are always already in the boat. And we're in the boat until we die. We don't know how we got in we tell stories. Our parents say, well, you know, mom and dad, we fell in love and we were romantic and we had you. Okay, you tell a story about where you came from, but it's a fucking story someone's telling you about how you came to be in the boat. But you're always already in the boat. We're all already in the boat. No one chose to be in the boat or not to be in the boat. No one chose to be or not to be. So actually, Shakespeare got it wrong. The great question isn't to be or not to be. Shakespeare got it fucking wrong. The great question isn't to be or not to be, because first of all, nobody can raise that question until you're already what? Here. You're already here. So the great question isn't to be or not to be. One, you don't, and I don't get asked that question. We're already fucking here. We're in the boat. So the great question is, how are we going to be while we're here? The best of all things is something entirely outside of your grasp. Not to be born. Not to be nothing. But you don't have that choice because you're already here. By the time you're aware of yourself, you're already here. But the second best thing Solanus says is for you to die soon. Brutal. Which, by the way, I'm going to lose my job for this for sure, but he's right. Metaphysics valorizes death. People are happy to die for God. But they're happy to die. Most Christians can't wait to die. Life is life on earth, life with the body, life with sin. It's miserable. It's ephemeral. It's filled with sin. Happy to die. Socrates was happy to die. He was ready to die. Right? Most of us die soon. Yeah, why not? Yeah, can't wait. We got Christian evangel. We got Pat Robertson saying that Donald Trump's going to be reelected, and that's going to set off the end times, and we're all going to fucking die in some apocalypse. It's better to die soon. Yeah, can't wait. Jerusalem's now the capital of Israel. Okay, prophecy in the Bible, we're going to fucking die. Can't wait. Thank God, take me. Can't wait. Hate this fucking place anyways. He's right. Solanus is right. Don't ask me to tell you what it's best not for you to hear. The best thing for you is never to have been born. Why? Because you're not up for it. But guess what? It's too late. You have no choice in that. You're already here. And so the second best thing for you, Solanus says, is to die soon, which is what we all say. Why me? Oh, can't wait to get rid of this body. Go to heaven. All right. So what does this mean other than what we've just said? And how is this related to the tragic Greeks bearing witness to and incorporating the Dionysian, the terror of life, into their art? Bottom of 22. The tragic Greeks knew and felt the fears and horrors of existence. In and of itself, life has no inherent meaning or purpose. You've got to give it that meaning, value, and purpose. And even under the best circumstances of doing that, it's still really damn hard. It's hard. It's hard. There's suffering because we become attached to things, of course. We fall in love. We make friendships. And all of this stuff is ephemeral. It fucking goes. It dies. Changes. It passes away. It dies. Sometimes people do it to us. Okay. The Greeks knew and felt the fears and horrors of existence. Okay, this is what the world is. Right? This is what the world is. This is what Nietzsche meant by the pessimistic art form, which we redefined as a realistic art. Can you see the world for what it is? Do you have the emotional strength and the intellectual courage and the fucking clarity to know where you are? You didn't have a choice to be here. But do you have the emotional strength and the intellectual clarity to know where you are and what you have to do to survive? And not just survive, but thrive? To affirm this. To know this and still want to do beautiful things. To know this and not complain, not whine, not say, why me? Are you able to know this and still affirm life? Still produce meaning and value and purpose? The Greeks knew and felt the fears and horrors of existence. They knew life wasn't easy. They didn't ask anybody to make it easy for them. They didn't expect anybody to make it easy for them. In order to be able to live it all, here we go. In order to be able to live it all, they had to interpose. They had to create, assert, inject, interpose. They had to interpose the radiant dream birth of the Olympians. They had to invent their gods. They had to invent a language. They had to invent meaning. They had to interpose the radiant dream birth of the Olympians between themselves and these whores. How do you live in this world? You invent meaning. You invent value, and you assert it as power. The terrible mistrust of the titanic forces of nature, right? And by the way, you're immortal. There's the Dionysian, there's natural, there's pandemics, and there's typhoons, and there's hurricanes, and there's floods. There's all sorts of titanic forces. These Dionysian titanic forces you'll never master. You don't see them coming, and there's shit you can do about it anyways. That's what he's talking about. The terrible mistrust of the titanic forces of nature. The Moira, mercilessly reigning over all man's knowledge. COVID, reigning over man's knowledge. Reigning, and by reigning, he means not raining down, but owning. Owning. COVID has owned our knowledge. It's owned us. We don't own nature. We don't master nature. The nothingness, the abyss, the forces. The Moira, mercilessly reigning over all of man's knowledge. The vultures that tormented the great friend of man, Prometheus. That's a beautiful line. And the terrible destiny of wise Oedipus. In short, the entire philosophy of the god of the woods. The Greeks, top of 23. Here we go. And this is life. This is what the tragic Greeks know, and this is what they did. The Greeks repeatedly overcame all of this, or at least veiled and concealed it with the artistic middle world of the Olympians. So life is this ongoing process where you where you bear witness to it. The suffering and the tragedy you'll never master, and that it's going to roll you. The Greeks repeatedly overcame all of this, or at least veiled it, dealt with it, and concealed it in some way with the artistic middle world of the gods, of the Olympians. In order, here we go, here's one of the most important lines. In order to live, the Greeks were profoundly compelled to create those gods. In order for us to live, we have to invent meaning, right? We have to invent meaning. We have to invent value. We have to invent purpose in order to live. The Greeks were profoundly compelled to create their gods. We might imagine their origin as follows. The Apollonian impulse to beauty led in gradual stages from the original Titanic order of the gods of fear to the Olympian order of the gods of joy. And he says, how else could life have been born? How else can life be lived? Right? How else can life be lived unless you find the emotional strength and the poetic and the intellectual creativity to invent your gods, to invent your meaning, to invent your power, your value, and to have the strength to assert it so you're not Ismene. How else could life have been born by human beings so sensitive, so impetuous in its desires, so uniquely capable of suffering, if it had not been revealed to them in their gods? Thus, the gods provide a justification for the life of man by living it themselves. Right? So you bring all of this in through your meaning, and you incorporate this into your life. You incorporate this into your art. And then Nietzsche says, four lines down, right in the middle of page 23. So the tragic Greeks, what makes them heroic is that they say no to Silenus. They reject Silenus's wisdom. We might now, Nietzsche writes, we might now reverse Silenus's wisdom to say of the tragic Greeks, the worst thing of all for them would be to die. The second worst, to die at all. Right? So the tragic Greeks are heroic, for Nietzsche. Because they captured Silenus. They captured Silenus. And they asked Silenus in this metaphor, what's the best and most desirable thing for human beings? And Silenus said to them, miserable, ephemeral children of hazard and hardship. Why do you force me to tell you what you should not know, what you're not prepared to know, what you're not strong enough to know? The best thing for you is never to have been born, to be nothing. But it's too late for that. You're already here. And here is a world of difficulty and suffering and Dionysian tragedy, which is going to be too much for you to bear. So the second best thing for you is to die quickly. And the tragic Greek said to Silenus, no. They understood life. They understood the difficulties and the challenges. They repeatedly overcame all of these things. And in their life and in their art, they said, we might now reverse Silenus's wisdom and say of the tragic Greeks. The tragic Greeks say the worst thing of all for us would be to die. The second worst, to die at all. Okay. So the tragic Greeks reject Silenus. We know what it means to be here. And despite the difficulty, despite the suffering, despite the pain, and knowing completely how it ends in death, we affirm life. We give it meaning. We give it value. We give it joy. We make beauty out of terror. We make beauty out of terror. We make beauty out of nothingness. We make beauty out of suffering. And in doing so, for even a little while, for a day, a month, a few years, we are heroic. We have joy. We never say, why me? We never say, I wish I were never born. No. We say no to Silenus. Chapter 4. On page 26, then Nietzsche kind of brings it all together. And he brings together this Apollonian and this Dionysian ideas and symbols, and then talks about the kind of the agon between them, and kind of continues this idea about how it makes people heroic. So the first paragraph on 26, Nietzsche writes, if it can be seen as at all imperative and prescriptive, this deification, this celebration of individuation of the individual, knows but a single law, the individual. That is, the maintenance of the boundaries of the individual. Moderation in the Hellenic sense. Apollo, as an ethical deity, demands moderation from his followers, and in order to maintain it, self-knowledge. Okay, so the Apollonian symbolizes form, both on the cultural level, with language and morality and political institutions and laws. Those are all Apollonian forms. And it represents the symbol of individuality. Principium individuationis. All right? And so the Apollo is the god of form. And that form means a kind of form. It means order. It means a kind of order. Right? It demands a kind of moderation. It demands a kind of order, which, by the way, is necessary. We have to have it. That's what he means. If it can be seen as at all imperative, right? And the Apollonian is imperative. If there's no language, there's no meaning, there's no value, there's no purpose, there's no nothing. There's no culture, there's no temples, there's no institutions, and there's no you. You're an Apollonian form. And that's what he means. If it can be seen as at all imperative, yes, it is. It's imperative. The Apollonian is existentially necessary. And it's beautiful. It's erotic. It's fabulous. We do amazing fucking things. I love my Apollonian mind. Okay. All right. It's an imperative. Right? Of this, I have to be in a kind of a, I'm talking. You recognize me as an individual. I recognize you guys as individuals. This is an imperative. That's what he's talking about. But individuation has a single law. And that is a kind of maintenance. I've got to maintain my boundaries. Nick Dungy's got to, in some way, maintain the boundaries of Nick Dunginess. And each of you have to do that for you. Okay, that's cool. Right? Right. That's part of what the Apollonian is. Okay. Now, last paragraph on page 26. The Apollonian Greeks also saw the effect of the Dionysian as titanic and barbaric. Okay. Ultimately, then, the tragic Greeks, unable to conceal from themselves, right? The tragic Greeks become the tragic Greeks because they're unable to conceal from themselves the fact that they themselves were also inwardly akin to these fallen titans and heroes. The Dionysian is in us. It's forces we can't master. Indeed, they were forced to feel even more than that. Here we go. Their entire existence, both on the cultural and the individual level, with all its beauty and moderation, was based on a veiled substratum of nothing, of suffering and knowledge, revealed to them once again by the Dionysian. Beautiful, right? So the Apollo, this God, invented God that symbolizes all human form and also symbolizes the principium individuationis in the Latin, the principle of individuality. It's necessary. It's beautiful. It's necessary. It's an imperative. Okay. And it requires that we do certain things to keep the fucking thing going. It's what we now call self-discipline. It's what we now call success. It's what we now call moderation. Success, right? Self-discipline. Okay, those are its requirements. Those are the requirements of the Apollonian, and they're necessary. And you guys know how damn necessary because you're killing them to keep them up. You're killing yourselves to keep them up. All the midterms and the LSATs and the 80-hour work and all the fucking shit you're doing to keep your Apollonian form going. The imperative of it. Okay, cool. You have to. I have to. But the tragic Greeks also became the tragic Greeks because they understood that as imperative and necessary and beautiful as the culture and our individuality is, right? They were unable to conceal. They couldn't deny. They couldn't hide the fact. They couldn't conceal from themselves the fact that they themselves were also kind of swept up in this Dionysian, both in terms of the fact that you exist and life is difficult and there's suffering, and also too that we also yearn. It's what happy hour is. We yearn for this Dionysian inside of us to kind of this deconstruct and decenter the rigidity, right? Burning Man, we yearn for Burning Man, right? College kids party from Thursday to Saturday. It's a 4 or 5 day week fucking party for college kids, right? That's the Dionysian. It's the Dionysian. Spring break coming, everybody's just fucking comes unglued for a week. And you hope you live through it. Okay. That's what he's talking about. I'm just paraphrasing to make it contemporary. Indeed, they were forced to feel even more than that. They were forced to feel and recognize that their entire existence, their Apollonian existence, with all its beauty and moderation, right? All your value and all your beauty and all your self-discipline, all your moderation, as important as it is, was based. It's all based on a veiled substratum that it's what's surrounding you, what it's based on. It's based on fucking nothing. On a veiled substratum of suffering and a kind of knowledge of the Dionysian. That's right, that you got to keep it going. Revealed to them once again by the Dionysian. Okay, top of page 27. The individual, with all of his or her restraints and moderations, from time to time was submerged, right? Was submerged in the self-oblivion of the Dionysian state and forgot the Apollonian dictates. Excess was, nothingness or excess was revealed as truth, as contradiction. The bliss born of pain spoke from the heart of nature. He means Dionysian. And consequently, wherever the Dionysian invasion was successful, the Apollonian was negated and destroyed. Okay, right? So there's this ongoing tension between the Apollonian need, the imperative to create meaning, to create order, to create beauty, and to assert it as power, to interpose it, as Nietzsche said earlier, between us and the world out there. So we can live in the world, so we can do these things. And yet, there's the awareness that the doing of these things is kind of always in this kind of space of the Dionysian, both on the higher level, right? Because we're living in a world we don't master. We're mortal. We don't even master our own death. And it's in the culture, in these festivals, in happy hour, and Burning Man, and ecstasy. Right? The Apollonian is negated, is destroyed. Right? Meaning and order and value is kind of, it will, in the big cosmic sense, it can be destroyed completely. And on the individual level, you can destroy it for a couple of hours or a couple of days at Burning Man. And then you come back and you can go be your tech bro. Took in Silicon Valley. The Apollonian can be negated and destroyed. Destroyed by what? The Dionysian. Both as a cosmic force, nothingness, chaos, fucking terror, and as intoxication on the individual level. Middle of the page. I have up until this point expanded on the observation, Nietzsche writes, I made at the beginning. How the Dionysian and the Apollonian, in a sequence of renewed bursts, mutually intensifying one another, dominated the nature of Greece, produced Greek tragedy. Okay, so the agon between these Apollonian need to create order and create beauty, to spiritualize nothingness and terror, and the Dionysian presence of the way that undermines it, negates it, and destroys it. This is what life is, right? It's conflict. It never ends until you die. But that conflict and what it does, it produces emotionally powerful, creatively sharp, and hungry fucking people who know where they are. And despite knowing where they are and what life is, still affirm it. They make beauty out of terror. Bottom of the page. And now we can see the sublime and esteemed work of art. That is Attic tragedy. We can see how these Greeks of the tragic age were themselves individually fucking heroic. They were emotionally strong. They survived 50 years of Persian invasion so the Greek world could live. They faced annihilation. They faced cultural extinction for 50 fucking years. Annihilation. Produced art. They incorporated that terror of annihilation from the Persian invasions, extinction from the Persian, and from death, cultural death. Right? They wrote it into their art. And now we can see the sublime and esteemed work of art, that is Attic tragedy, as the common goal of the two impulses, the Apollonian and the Dionysian, whose mysterious marriage, I hate that word, that mysterious tension, after a long period of early strife, was finally blessed with a child such as Antigone. All right, there you go. We're going to end there. Exam is due on Tuesday. Email it to me as a Word or PDF, some Apollonian document, so I can open it and read it and know where you are mentally and emotionally.
Can I ask you a question?
Yep.
As we read this, I can't help but wonder, did they encourage, is he encouraging suicide? Or
if you read this and walk away thinking he's encouraging suicide, you have fundamentally misunderstood the text.
not entirely, but and to a certain extent?
Zero. No. The answer is simple. No.
Does he not argue the opposite?
He's arguing exactly the opposite. Exactly
Okay.
the opposite. If you find yourself in existence and something has hurt you or made you suffer, and you say, I wish I were never born, or this is so unjust, or God forbid I'm going to kill myself, you are fundamentally unheroic, according to Nietzsche. You fundamentally, you are proving Silenus's wisdom. Life is, it ends up, you know what, you're not up for the existential responsibility of your own existence. You're not prepared for it. And the fact that you want to kill yourself is an example of that. And by the way, let me just slide in there since you brought it up, and I'm definitely going to lose my job now for this, right? But you brought it up.
I'm sorry.
No. It's important you brought it up, but it's heavy. I'm going to say things that are going to get me fucking fired. But you brought it up, and it has to be said. Nietzsche thinks that we are the last people. We're sick. Nietzsche thinks that America, late modern America, is a culture in utter collapse, weak, fearful, mentally sick, emotionally sick. And one sign that Nietzsche is right is precisely the fact that the first and the second leading causes of death of people your age is suicide. Suicide. Young people your age, the leading cause of death is suicide. Holy fuck. Right? What does that mean? It means we've produced a whole culture of young people and young adults who would rather fucking die. They'd kill themselves than continue living. That is a sign of the end. That's not joy. That's nihilism. That's nihilism. It's sickness. It's despair. It's nihilism. I wish I were never born, so I'm going to kill myself. The fact that this is a cultural epidemic for us, Nietzsche would say, proves his point. We're not well people. We're not well emotionally. We're not well intellectually. We're off in ourselves. Silenus was right. The best thing for you, it turns out, was never to have been born. You're right. But you know what? You didn't have a choice. You're here. And so what's your choice? Oh, I'm going to fucking kill myself. That's right. Silenus was right. Holy shit. Okay. All right. Welcome to Nietzsche. Have a great day. Love you guys very much. And see you a week from today. No class on Tuesday.
Thank you, Professor.
Yep. Send the midterm by Tuesday at midnight.
Thank you, Professor.
Yep.
Thank you, Professor.
Be strong.
Thank you, Nick.
Yep.